A recent video in the series called Religion for Breakfast, a channel here on YouTube, talked about the rise of what they call atheist churches, or the nones, people who consider themselves of no religion. And what I want to do in today's video is look at that a bit, in particular with respect to Buddhism as a religion, as well as with respect to a secular Buddhist approach. Coming right up. I'm Doug Smith of the Online Dharma Institute, that's onlinedharma.org. If you're new to this channel and interested in living a wiser and a kinder and a calmer life, consider subscribing to the channel and click the bell if you want to receive notifications when I have new videos up. Also, we might want to check out my new course, The Buddha's Teaching to Lay People, which is linked here down below in the show notes. And while you're at the Online Dharma Institute, you can also check out my other courses that I have up there if you want a deeper dive into the Dharma of early Buddhism. Andrew Henry over at the YouTube channel Religion for Breakfast has a really interesting video up about the role of religion and the rise of what they call the nones. That is N-O-N-E-S, not N-U-N-S. The nones, people who have no religion, or at least express to having no particular religious views, because it seems as though this group has been rising steadily since the early 90s. And I'll put up a chart here from the General Social Survey from 2018, which found that those who have no religion, that is to say 23.1% of the public, are now statistically tied as the largest plurality in the country with evangelicals at 22.8%. These are basically statistically tied. They're close enough to be identical. They're within the margin of error for this survey. And additionally, more Americans are now finding themselves what's called spiritual but not religious. That is 27% of people in a recent Pew survey from 2017. Now, there are a couple of quite separate issues here, but they're related. One has to do with the role of Buddhism in all this, and the other, separate but related issue, has to do with what secular Buddhism, or a secular approach to Buddhism might have to do in all of this. Pretty clearly, a secular approach to Buddhism is going to be in the nones category. Although in all of these cases, there's something of a gray area. In particular, there are the questions about what we really mean by words like religion or spirituality. Atheists who consider themselves not religious but spiritual, that's a question about what we might be considering in that case. What do we mean by spiritual in that case that's not religious? Also, in this video that I'm referencing, and I'll put a link, I shouldn't say again, but I'll put a link to it down below, either Andrew Henry or one of his people he's interviewing makes the claim basically that religion is identified with belief in God, that the two go together. So there's a sort of notion that atheist spirituality is a kind of an oxymoron because all religions are obviously theist in some sense. Or that the idea of a godless church is an oxymoron, again, because religious buildings, religious institutions are considered to be institutions built around a belief in God. And these are things that I think we have to look into a bit farther. Another place, I think one of the interviewers says that being spiritual but atheist takes work. That's what they say, it takes work. But all of these things, being an atheist church or spiritual but atheist, all of these things can be seen as true of traditional Buddhism. And then we might ask, is traditional Buddhism a religion in that case, according to this kind of analysis? Well, I've done a video on that question. I'll put a link to it up here. And that's a video where I'm saying that Buddhism can be seen as non-religious. Now, to be fair to my general point in that video, it can be seen either way, and I say that there as well. Buddhism is clearly from an anthropological or sociological point of view a religion, just as much as Christianity or Judaism or Islam is a religion. However, it can also be seen as a philosophy, a way of life, depending on how we approach it. And especially if we look at the earliest tradition, that is, the material preserved in the Pali Canon and related material in Chinese, the Chinese agamas, and the fragmentary material we have in other languages, the earliest material can be seen very, very clearly, I think, as philosophical in the same kind of way that we would see material from, let's say, the ancient Stoics. That is to say, it was intended to be a way of life that would bring us towards a better life, that would make our lives better, and that would have certain benefits for us within this life. Now, that was also surrounded with a number of more speculative claims about rebirth and so on, which could take it into the realm of religion, but then Stoicism as well had those kinds of claims. We have those kinds of claims in practices in early Greece as well, Greece and Rome. So there is the real question about Buddhism, whether it can be considered a religion by these standards, where we're thinking that religions have to be theist in some sense. Now, some people will say, and I think this is a reasonable reaction, that of course in Buddhism you do have gods. Now, Buddhism does not deny the existence of deities. However, I've also done a video about this. I'll put it on the screen if you're interested in more about this. But in a nutshell, although Buddhism does sanction the existence of deities, within early Buddhism they're talked about all the time, they're considered not of central religious importance. They're more like powerful beings that exist elsewhere in space and time, that can be helpful or harmful to us, but that are not going to lead us to awakening in particular. The Buddha viewed these deities as essentially pompous blowhards. Indeed, he made fun of them in one very famous sutta. Made fun of basically the chief god as being a god who was ignorant but liked to speak highly of himself. And the Buddha also rejected the notion of a creator god as being an unskillful kind of belief, because it would lead to a sense of non-action, because there was nothing we needed to do. This creator god was in control of everything. It's also the case that the Buddha called himself, or was called by his Sangha, the teacher of gods and men, which is intended to imply that yes, the gods did exist for them. However, they did not know the proper way to awakening. And so just as much as the Buddha taught humans, he also taught gods. He was in a position that was superior to gods and the ordinary realm of humans, in the sense that he knew the way to awakening. He had overcome, it is said, birth and death. He had overcome the poisons of greed, hatred, and ignorance in a way that the gods had not. So while, yes, the Buddhism does literally sanction the existence of deities, they're not deities of real religious importance. And in this video that I've been discussing, Andrew Henry interviews Dr. Anthony Pinn, who is a professor of religious studies, and Dr. Pinn brings up the case of humanism, and in relation to contemporary atheism. Now, in my opinion, early Buddhism in particular, and Buddhism in general, can be seen as a humanistic religion, in the same sense that we use the term humanism now to describe certain outlooks on life and on the world. That is, that humans are the center of our interest. It's not the deities, it's the humans that are the center of interest. Humans are the center around which the philosophy is organized, or the belief system is organized. Also, humans have to save themselves. There is not a sense of expecting outward help from some more powerful kind of force in the universe. Instead, humans hold the reins to their own benefit or ill. It is us who do what needs to be done, or it's us, the only people who can do it are us ourselves, we ourselves. And so in that sense as well, Buddhism in particular, early Buddhism, is a humanistic kind of life stance. And while gods indeed may exist, there may indeed be deities, they're not going to help us. They're of no real benefit to our progress along the path, because these gods themselves are not awakened beings. They simply don't know the proper information. Now, Having said that, of course, Buddhism is a very broad kind of religion nowadays. It's a manifold religion, and there are many different approaches to practice and belief in Buddhism in the wider scheme. And not every Buddhist school or type will agree with this. In other words, there are some forms of Buddhism, some practices of Buddhism, some Buddhist belief systems in which there is something more like a deity, something more like a Buddha to whom we can pray, from whom we can ask for some kind of intercession on our behalf, even on the road to awakening. That is, however, not the case, at least in the early stratum, and in certain contemporary practices as well. And when it comes to contemporary practice, indeed, there is a broad range of people who consider themselves Buddhist. Many will consider themselves religious Buddhists. We said this discussion is about the nones, and particularly a rise of people who don't consider themselves religious in the United States in particular. And many people who consider themselves Buddhist wouldn't put themselves as a nun. They would say they are a religious Buddhist. Many of them might, however, consider themselves nuns. They might consider themselves as pursuing a life path, even a traditional life path, which was non-religious because perhaps it was essentially atheist, that it didn't really depend upon a creator deity from whom we had to ask intercession. So there's going to be a broad range, I think, of approaches to Buddhism as a practice here. As well, if we recall back on that chart we saw, many of the people who became nuns, it seems, have come from sort of mainstream versions of Christianity, although even Catholicism and more evangelical Christianity has gone down slightly. There has been a sort of a general a sway from mainstream, I would say, liberal Christianity into the nuns. And I think some of these people who come from more mainstream versions of Christianity or Judaism or what have you have also become Buddhists. And in particular, they may have become even traditional Buddhists, that is to say, Buddhists who consider themselves religious, but they've done so out of a similar kind of feeling that one would become a nun. That is to say, that they would feel that traditional either Christianity or whatever it might be isn't quite satisfying, at least in its kind of belief in God in particular. Many people become non-religious because they give up a belief in God. That is a classic reason to become non-religious if you come from a Christian or a Jewish or a Muslim background. However, as I say, many people who do this may instead prefer to become even traditional Buddhists. That is, they may accept Buddhist ideas of rebirth, which a secularist wouldn't, but nevertheless believe that that is a sort of, for them, a more satisfying kind of cosmological picture. Now, so what we find in this video is a sort of a wrestling with this notion of an atheist church, and Dr. Anthony Pinn, who is again interviewed in this video, talks about expanding the idea of religion so that it isn't just about, let's say, a belief in God or something around a creator deity, but rather that it's what he says a binding together, which is an idea that comes from the actual literal meaning of the word religion, which comes from the words to bind together. And again, traditionally, a religion would bind you to the deity in some sense, at least traditionally in the West. However, this can be seen as a binding together of ourselves in certain kinds of groups with a similar kind of aim. And Dr. Pinn talks about this kind of aim being to make life meaningful and to wrestle with the kind of fundamental issues of life. And that's what he says might be a better definition of religion. It's this binding together into groups where we're going to make life meaningful and wrestle with these fundamental issues. Now, there are, I think, various problems that I have with that definition, or at least questions, I should say. One of the questions is it too broad? Because we might say that people, for example, who are very serious devotees to a particular sports team may indeed get together in groups and make life meaningful. Their lives are made meaningful by the actions, the successes and failures, the wins and losses of their particular team. They may even use it, in a sense, to wrestle with the fundamental issues of life, of what it really matters in life. whether winning really matters or how winning really matters to them, how putting 100% of your effort into every game is what matters to them. And that's not, I would submit, probably not really a religion, but it sort of fits that definition. And on the other hand, the definition may be a little bit too broad, because many people who are overt traditional followers of a religion really don't follow their religion because they're so interested in the fundamental issues of life. They follow it for more social reasons. It's because their family is a Christian or a Jew or whatever it might be, a Muslim. Their family is in that religion. They have friends in the religion. They enjoy going to religious services and being with their friends, and perhaps listening to uplifting sermons every so often, although they may frankly find them boring and enjoy the social stuff more. I think there's going to be a broad range of different approaches. And we wouldn't want to say that somebody wasn't a member of religion because they weren't finding answers to the deep questions, perhaps because they don't have deep questions, or the deep questions don't particularly interest them. Anyhow, the point that Andrew Henry and Dr. Pin make in this video is that atheists or non-religious people, secularists, that they also see benefit in community, in getting together with people of like mind, and they say even in ritual. That is to say, they look at certain, what they term atheist churches or secular churches, that include what we might call varieties of ritual, a very tamed down ritual, but nevertheless ritual kinds of occurrences within those churches, if you might call them that. And I would agree that, I think everybody, whatever belief system they may hold, everyone really, I think, understands the benefit of community. In particular, a community where you can feel that you are making common effort towards some common goal, and so that you can be of help to one another in various respects. That people who know more may be able to help people who know less in a particular frame and a particular part, and so that they can learn as a community. And when it comes to ritual, I've done a video on secular rituals or rituals in secular Buddhism. I'll put a link to it up here. I think the ritual, there needn't be any conflict, any necessary conflict between the acceptance of certain kinds of ritual and a secular outlook or atheist outlook on questions of religion or belief systems. Because ritual can be its own benefit in the here and now. Now, there's going to be different, of course, approaches to ritual. There'll be some approaches on which ritual has, we might term a kind of magical influence on supernatural kinds of entities. And of course, somebody who is a secularist is liable not to particularly find that a useful way to think about them. But nevertheless, rituals can be useful to us even if we reject that kind of move. Rituals can be useful simply because they calm us, because we find them meaningful or beautiful. We simply find them ethically attractive, or because they remind us of something, or because they help us to do the kinds of practices that we're doing, such as bowing, helping us to overcome our own egoism. That's something that you can believe in without necessarily believing anything else about, let's say, its effect on some kind of deity. So I think many secular practitioners, secular Buddhist practitioners, and secularists of all stripes may indeed see a benefit in these kinds of rituals. And pursuing these kinds of rituals or other things that we do together in a community is what's known in Buddhism as a Sangha, a group that we get together and practice together. And this kind of spiritual friendship, what's called in Pali Kalyana Mittata, which is the notion of getting together with friends who are all on the same spiritual path and the same ethical path, if you like. That word spiritual can be a problem for some people because it may connote things that are supernatural, but we can say an ethical path instead if we like. This practice together is something that can be of benefit to everybody, no matter what your belief system is. And it can do this by bringing us into conversation with deeper issues in our lives, as Dr. Pin suggests. That the part of the point that we're trying to do here by coming into community with others is to find deeper principles. and practice together with them and try to make ourselves better with them. In particular, they can be practices of ethics, or of justice, or of some kind of social impact on the wider world. That is to say that these practices, or the beliefs that come with the practices, don't need to be supernatural in any sense. They don't need to involve a deity to whom or from whom we're asking something. They can simply be practices of betterment, practices of self-betterment and practices of betterment in the wider world. We can, many of us find benefit in practicing together with people on, let's say, issues of environmentalism, on issues of social justice, on issues of ethics generally, just general kindness and being kind to other people. Also, we may pursue a path that is simply one of appreciating nature, walking in nature and appreciating the beauty of the natural world, which may lead us towards, let's say, an environmental practice as well, or it may not. Or others find great joy and benefit in contemplating the sciences and learning about the sciences and learning about the cosmos, learning about the broader world in which we live. And still others find great benefit in meditation and in awareness of the here and now, in the present moment, in the depth of our experience right here and right now. These are all methods that somebody, frankly, either a traditional believer or a more secular, shall we say, atheist in the sense of the video believer, both of them may accept, because there doesn't need to be any further, more speculative kinds of beliefs that are held as well as these beliefs. So, but then, are these religious issues? Are they spiritual issues? And I think these words are vague and general, and so there aren't necessarily going to be any easy answers to those questions. For some people, they will be religious. For some people, they will be only spiritual. And for some still others, they will be neither of those, but they will simply be ethical or focus on justice in various ways. But all I'm saying is that these kind of spiritual communities, these kind of spiritual sanghas, can have a broader impact, as indeed I know in places like New York Insight, there is a broad impact that they're trying to make, both in the practices, the particular Buddhist practices of their Sangha practitioners, but also in the broader world in terms of justice and in the environment. And in any event, terms like religion and being spiritual, religion and spirituality, these are Western terms. These are terms that you don't find in, let's say, early Buddhism in particular. And so they're going to be terms that are somewhat alien. They're not easily translatable back into that early language. And so to a certain extent, they're terms that cut at right angles to what we find in Buddhism and early Buddhism, which is simply a life path trying to make ourselves better, trying to reach an extinction of greed, hatred, and delusion in various ways. So I think what I want to say here is that with this rise of the nones, this rise of the people without any kind of a belief in religion in the United States, we can see that to the extent that they're interested in a more humanist kind of approach, to the extent that they are not so interested in a theistic approach, in an approach that involves an acceptance of a deity, then both traditional Buddhism and secular Buddhism are options. They're live options for that really now a majority of the country who may be interested in either a more traditional path that is not involved in deity worship, or in a less traditional path that is more overtly secular. So if you're on that kind of path and find this kind of path interesting, check out my other videos, check out my Patreon page. It's linked down below if you would like to help support the work that we're all doing here in expanding knowledge of this kind of other option. Give the video a thumbs up if you liked it, share it with whoever you might think would be interested, and I hope we'll catch you on the next one of these videos. And meanwhile, all of you, be well.